As of the writing of this script, and also the recording of the video, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is 1% away from tying with Eternals for the lowest rated Marvel movie of all time on Rotten Tomatoes, and while the audience score is much better, hopping over to IMDb and Letterboxd reveals less than stellar ratings from users, especially when you compare it to the other Ant-Man movies and the rest of the MCU as a whole. Now listen, I'll say right off the bat, I thought this movie was better than it's being given credit for. It's very funny and very entertaining, much more so than the immediate predecessor, which has a much better rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it has a really cool villain and seemingly does a relatively good job at setting up the future of the MCU and the multiverse saga. I think it might be looked back on like Age of Ultron, which wasn't great in its own right, especially at the time, but looking back, it's very important for the overall structure of the MCU, and maybe the Infinity Saga just wouldn't have worked if Age of Ultron wasn't like it was, so maybe Quantumania will be similar. However, I do understand the criticisms for this movie. I did come out of the movie slightly disappointed, if not very disappointed, as I think the execution didn't quite live up to what is an incredible premise that could have lent itself to being one of the best Marvel movies of all time, not just a movie that's funny and entertaining. It could have been much more. I mainly felt disappointed with very key elements that are very easy to pinpoint, that are clear missed opportunities, and I thought I'd make a video going over all those missed opportunities and what I would change to make not only those elements of Quantumania better, but in the end, have the execution of Quantumania live up to its premise. Oh, and obviously spoilers for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. First of all, I think the title of the movie isn't really indicative of what the movie is, mostly because the Wasp, or Hope Van Dyne, did not feel like a main character, and certainly not like a titular character, which she is. If anything, out of the 5 members of what is, I guess, Team Ant-Man, she had the least to do, and the Wasp in the title might as well have referred to Janet Van Dyne. The missed opportunity here is a bit of a broader concept. The rest of the video is going to be a bit more specific, with some things being just talking about a specific scene, but here it's about the entire movie just giving Hope more to do, and especially giving her more scenes with Scott, because by the end of the movie, when they do share that one scene together, it becomes crystal clear how little they interacted in this movie. On the other hand, I think if the title was actually Quantumania with the ant and the man in bold and a bigger font, and just without the Ant-Man and the Wasp, I think that would have been incredibly ballsy and this movie would have made $18 billion. But while Hope did not feel like a major character, Cassie Lang definitely did, and I think the movie suffers for it. I don't know if it's how she's written or the actress playing her, but out of the 4 movies that she has now appeared in, including Endgame, this is the first one where I just didn't feel anything for the connection between Scott Lang and his daughter. The chemistry just wasn't there, and that's very unfortunate because the relationship is meant to be the crux of Scott Lang's motivation, and so it becomes far less engaging when you just don't care as much about their relationship. The reason why this is a missed opportunity is because it felt like they have a very easy opportunity to make this work and went out of their way to make it not work because, like I said, this is the movie where I felt the connection between Cassie and her father the least, and that includes Avengers Endgame, a movie where Cassie appears for a total of maybe 15 seconds, but in those 15 seconds, I felt the emotional weight of their relationship more than the entirety of this movie, and I think that's at least partially due to the actresses. In Endgame, Cassie is played by Emma Fuhrmann, while in Quantumania, she's played by Katherine Newton. This recasting hasn't been explained as far as I can tell, and not only does it slightly damage the integrity of the canon of this universe, because why does Cassie look so different in this movie compared to Endgame, but also I just think that Katherine Newton, from what I've seen, is not a very good actress, and the actress who played her in Endgame, at least in the one scene I saw her in that movie, did a much better job. And looking at that one scene in Endgame, which was an emotional reunion between her and her father after not seeing him for 5 years and then having fully grown up in that time, and both she and Paul Rudd nailed that scene, comparing that with anything in Quantumania makes this new actress and her portrayal of Cassie look like a joke, and it's like, why did we do this? Why recast her? Why go out of your way to ruin this? Why didn't we just take the actress who was cast for Endgame and use her in this movie? Katherine Newton looks a bit more like young Cassie than Emma Fuhrmann does, sure, but is that really worth a recast with a worse actress and then for the actress from Endgame to just be screwed out of that role? Absolutely not, and what it led to was a worse actress who had less chemistry with Paul Rudd, which led to the emotional core of the movie not holding any weight, and it all could have been avoided by just using the opportunity of the actress who was cast in Endgame that was missed in this movie. And then there's Kang, who is supposed to be set up as the big villain of the multiverse saga, and I gotta say, my feelings are very mixed on how he was handled in this movie. I thought that for the most part, in this movie they were doing a great job at setting him up. The scene with Janet touching his mind is terrifying. Any scene of people refusing to say his name and just referring to him as him, like he's Voldemort or something, left an ominous feeling in the air. And then finally, when we saw Kang threatening Scott and getting him to do his bidding, he felt truly powerful and unstoppable. Like he could bloodbend, he could stop people in their tracks, nobody could touch him, to a point where I believed him when he told Scott that he's out of his league. They were doing such a good job, but then everything came crumbling down in the third act, specifically with Kang, mostly because they completely nerfed him. He was, like I said, unstoppable in the beginning, but then in the final battle, for some reason, he just wasn't. There's no explanation for it. Ant-Man is able to go toe-to-toe with him. He's overwhelmed by a swarm of ants, which, by the way, the scene with Hank explaining how the ants advanced and became a Type 2 civilization was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in a movie, and it was hilarious. It was one of the funniest scenes I've seen in a Marvel movie in years, but I don't know if it was meant to be funny. I still don't know. Like, watching it in the theater, I think a lot of people didn't laugh because it was meant to be a serious moment, but how could you take that seriously? It was hilarious. But getting back to the point, by the end of the movie, Kang basically only kills one named character, and honestly, I don't even remember his name. I'm not even sure he was ever given a name. I just referred to him as the lamp guy or the head guy. But then, Kang just loses and dies with really no explanation for how he went from being so powerful in the beginning to be able to be beaten by Ant-Man one-on-one in the end. It just didn't make sense. And by the end, I felt very underwhelmed by Kang because, ignoring all of the other Kangs that exist, just looking at this one version of the character, he isn't really all that unique. He's a typical villain in a superhero movie, and he could have been such a unique villain, which leads to a unique superhero movie where basically the hero is completely outclassed by the villain, which I think is partially why this movie is getting bad reviews. It just has a simple plot of hero versus villain without challenging anything about the formula, and it sucks because Kang and what he's being set up as in this universe, and even this version of Kang, could have been something really special. But you might be asking, how would I change this without also changing the ending of this movie? Well, I think it's pretty simple. This movie introduced to us an entire world of characters that, let's be honest, we'll probably never see again. These incredibly zany and wacky Rick and Morty alien feeling characters who are a bit jarring in live action, whose names I don't remember, and will probably never hold any significance going forward. And there's this one moment in the third act where Kang goes out and starts killing some of the resistance and starts to push them back, and that's cool, but like I said earlier, the only important character he killed was the lamphead guy. I think he should have killed all of them. I think to truly establish a scary villain who lives up to his name and his build-up, but at the same time for the heroes to defeat him and for him to be set up as the villain of this saga, Kang should have absolutely decimated the entire population of this city, killed the holes guy, killed the jacked woman, killed the mind-reading guy, kill everyone, and then in the end, the main characters managed to either trap him in the quantum realm alone forever, or come up with some plan to trick Kang into the same ending he had in this movie where he dies, because it was never believable for a second that Scott could actually beat him, like could keep up with his powers. That was never believable. This does sound like a pretty dark ending, like Cassie accidentally gets them trapped in the quantum realm and then because of that everybody dies in the quantum realm, but I think that's something this movie needed to truly set up the threat that is Kang, to get people more invested in the threat that is looming in phases 5 and 6. All that being said, with all those missed opportunities and others I didn't even mention, like Hope and Scott being stuck in the quantum realm maybe, leaving some sort of weight to their sacrifice at the end, I didn't even mention that, but let's say that didn't happen. Everything in the movie is exactly the same up until the ending. I think the final scene of the movie just needs a single tweak to make this movie great. Honestly, it was so close. They had such a good ending, and they ruined it. The Loki end credit scene was exciting just because Loki is a great show and people are excited for season 2. The Council of Kangs end credit scene, however, was very goofy, and leaving the theater, I didn't feel excited at all about all these weird versions of Kang, and you probably need to either remove that scene completely or make it less goofy for this little change to work. But it's not in that scene where the missed opportunity presents itself, it's in the final scene, the scene before the credits, where I think they came so close to a great ending. The movie ends with a weird cut between a door to the real world opening behind Scott and Hope to what feels like maybe a couple days later, maybe the next day, and a redoing of Scott's inner monologue that was in the beginning of the movie, but obviously for now. But then the thoughts start to get dark, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. This scene right here where Scott starts to think about the implications of what they've done now, like did they actually beat Kang? Or if beating Kang, and they did beat Kang, that will lead to the even bigger threat that Kang warned them about, and he caused this, did he kill everybody? This scene gave me chills. It was terrifying, and no more than during this scene and this inner monologue was I more scared for the people of the Marvel Universe, or even more excited for the future of the MCU, but then, in MCU fashion, everything came crumbling down with a joke. Nah, it's probably fine. And that was followed by a happy scene, and then another joke, and then the goofy end credit scene. By the time the movie ended, the dread of the scene faded, and I was left with nothing. No feelings towards the future, no dread, no excitement, nothing but a feeling of missed opportunity, which is what inspired this video, because it's such a simple and small change they could have made that not only would have made the ending of this movie much better, but in turn, the entire movie would have been so much better, and maybe even the whole saga, and it's crazy because the change is so simple. First of all, I would have that happy ending they would have at the end, but before the inner monologue. So Scott and Hope walk into the portal and they hug Cassie, Hank, and Janet, and then there's the cut to the new inner monologue. Then the monologue starts to get dark and depressing and terrifying, and then at the climax of those thoughts, instead of cutting the tension with the joke, you cut it with the credits. The movie ends on this terrifying beat that I guarantee you would have left audiences and maybe even critics with a feeling of dread, fear, and excitement towards the threat on the horizon. This is very frustrating to think about because they had this scene, it was right there, ripe for a cut to the credits, but for some reason they can never resist the joke. And while I don't think this movie suffered much from an overuse of jokes, aside from maybe everything to do with MODOK and especially his sacrifice, I do think this singular joke and this singular creative choice in this one moment in the ending change what could have been a fantastic ending to an okay movie that elevates it to a good movie, and instead we get an average ending to an average movie that remains an average movie and just an okay movie, and everything to do with that is such a missed opportunity. The end credit scene probably would have ruined this anyway, but like I said, that would need to be changed as well, and with just those few simple changes, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania could have been a truly great movie, but alas, the final product, while entertaining and very funny, missed too many opportunities to live up to its premise.